Hey guys, so we're back to talk a bit about David Hume, the Scottish philosopher born today in 1711. A man who managed to combine true depth and complexity of thought with a basic common sense and belief in the wisdom of the ordinary, as it's been called. One of the reasons I love David Hume is that we have so much in common. Because aside from being horrifically ugly, he too was a lawyer early on in his career and then abandoned that profession, finding it to be soul-destroying and without any meaning or purpose, and then decided to dedicate his life, like me, to philosophy. He studied at the same university as me, the University of Edinburgh. In fact, I studied in the tower named after him, the David Hume Tower. And he wanted to be more than just a philosopher, but a public intellectual, someone who has opinions on anything. Commonalities aside, he is genuinely a fascinating thinker. To give you a bit of context, he's part of that long philosophical conversation that began with René Descartes and the rationalists that he represented. Rationalists were those philosophers who sought to find an objective view of the world through reason. They believed that by applying reason to the puzzles of the world, they could arrive to this higher plane of understanding that was objective, free from the ignorance and biases of our baser nature, and instead closer to divine way of seeing things, we could say. People like Descartes saw reason, rationality, as something that was almost divine and that separated us from the animals. Because of this, they saw us as being somehow outside of the natural order of things, of cause and effect, and having these, almost you could call them superpowers like free will. Think about it. If everything is cause and effect, then we can't really have free will because everything that we will is caused by something before it. Every neuron that fires off inside our brain is caused by something that affects that. So where's the freedom there? But the rationalists are saying we do have free will because it's something we could almost say spiritual. Now, on the other side of this equation, you have the empiricists who say that we don't gain knowledge through reason, we gain knowledge through perceptions, i.e. the only things that enter our brain in terms of knowledge are our sensory perceptions, stuff that comes to us from what we experience through eyesight, through hearing, through taste, through tactile impressions. And that highlights the importance for empiricists of perception over reason. People like Bishop Berkeley even took it so far as to say that to exist is to be perceived, that there's no material world out there, it's all just a set of perceptions in our mind. And it's at this point in the conversation that Hume joins in. Next on the Great Everything. So ever since René Descartes, there's been this philosophical conversation going back and forth between the rationalists, who believe reason elevates us in a way beyond the ordinary operation of the laws of nature, giving us, we could almost say, a spark of the divine compared to other living creatures. In all this, Hume comes along and says, forget all this stuff about reason and how we're different and better and all that. We humans are far more like animals than we think. We're just another kind of animal, bound by the same laws of physics. We're not different. We're not above this mechanical universe. We are a part of it because we're more like animals than we think. First of all, Hume says that we are more influenced by feelings than by reason and rationality. Quote, reason is and ought to be the slave of passion. Now think how new this is. He's writing in the Age of Enlightenment, which is known as the Age of Reason. Rationality is hailed as this great property and principle that will elevate us from the drudgery and superstition of the past. Hume says rationality is just another kind of instinct, so we don't need to focus on understanding reason, but we actually need to understand our feelings better. Our leading convictions, they're not driven by reason and rationality. Think of the backfire effect, which you've all heard of now because of that oatmeal comic that was going around, which I hated. Or confirmation bias and all these other things that we're seeing and that are getting talked more about because of the political situation around the Western world. What happens is we have feelings that tell us what we believe, and then we look for rationalizations. We don't use reason to construct our convictions. We reason from our convictions. Then reason comes in at a later stage to either justify or reject ideas, finding ideas either reassuring or threatening to those convictions. And according to Hume, education should be focused on this. It should address feelings, not reason. So in ethics, for instance, it's not about learning to be more reasonable, which all the scientific-minded Enlightenment philosophers wanted. He says we need emotional training. We need to learn to be more patient, more at ease with ourselves, to listen more. Being good doesn't mean having these objective standards, it just means being a nice person to be around. But my favorite aspect of David Hume's philosophy is his focus on constructs. So, for the empiricists like Hume, we only know what we perceive. All our knowledge is stuff that is coming to us through our experience, through our senses. But if the only things we know are things that we can see, touch, and hear, then where are we getting all these abstract notions like beauty, or sovereignty, or freedom? They're not real, right? They're constructs. And Hume says it's because we need to create patterns and narratives between facts so that we can give them some kind of meaning and direction. Okay, but then what about stuff we take for granted, like causation? Do cause and effect really exist? Now, I've already done a segment on causation and Hume, so I'll just echo that in a bit, but that's actually a fascinating concept that blew my mind the first time I grappled with it. And what about personal identity? Is that a construct too? Hume says there is no core self. When he meditated, he was always coming across perceptions like, I'm cold, I'm hungry, I'm thinking about a blue sky, but he could never catch his self. So he was only observing a perception, but not a self, not an I. This is a quote, "We are nothing but a bundle or collection of different perceptions, which succeed each other with an inconceivable rapidity, and are in perpetual flux and movement." I love this because, it's very Eastern, the Buddhist idea of the illusion of the self, but it's really one to think about and digest, this idea of, is there really a me behind these perceptions that come through my mind? So, you can never do such a great thinker justice in just a few minutes, but that's him in a nutshell. Hume is about questioning our basic assumptions. Is what I believe true? Why am I feeling this way? Is what I feel necessarily a reflection of the way things are? But above all, it's about the idea that in gaining a better understanding about how we work, we're training ourselves to be more understanding of other people, with all their flaws and limitations. Because other people are no less and no more an animal than we are.